Costa's audiobook presents. Angels and Demons by Dan Brown.
Langdon saw what he was looking for a good 10 yards before they reached it. Through the scattered tourists, the white marble ellipse of Bernini's West Ponente stood out against the grey granite cubes that made up the rest of the piazza. Vittoria apparently saw it too. Her hand tensed. "Relax," Langdon whispered. "Do your piranha thing." Vittoria loosened her grip. As they drew nearer, everything seemed forbiddingly normal. Tourists wandered, nuns chattered along the perimeter of the piazza, a girl fed pigeons at the base of the obelisk. Langdon refrained from checking his watch. He knew it was almost time. The elliptical stone arrived beneath their feet, and Langdon and Vittoria slowed to a stop. Not over-eagerly, just two tourists pausing dutifully at a point of mild interest. "West Ponente," Vittoria said, reading the inscription on the stone. Langdon gazed down on the marble relief and felt suddenly naive. Not in his art books, not in his numerous trips to Rome, not ever had West Ponente's significance jumped out at him. Not until now. The relief was elliptical, about 3 feet long and carved with a rudimentary face, a depiction of the west wind as an angel-like countenance. Gusting from the angel's mouth, Bernini had drawn a powerful breath of air blowing outward away from the Vatican, the breath of God. This was Bernini's tribute to the second element, air, an ethereal scepter blown from angels' lips. As Langdon stared, he realized the significance of the relief went deeper still. Bernini had carved the air in 5 distinct gusts. 5. What was more, flanking the medallion were 2 shining stars. Langdon thought of Galileo. 2 stars, 5 gusts, ellipses, symmetry. He felt hollow. His head hurt. Vittoria began walking again almost immediately, leading Langdon away from the relief. "I think someone's following us," she said. Langdon looked up. "Where?" Vittoria moved a good 30 yards before speaking. She pointed up at the Vatican as if showing Langdon something on the dome. "The same person has been behind us all the way across the square." Casually, Vittoria glanced over her shoulder. "Still on us. Keep moving." "You think it's the assassin?" Vittoria shook her head. "Not unless the Illuminati hires women with BBC cameras." When the bells of St. Peter's began their deafening clamor, both Langdon and Vittoria jumped. It was time. They had circled away from West Ponente in an attempt to lose the reporter, but were now moving back toward the relief. Despite the clanging bells, the area seemed perfectly calm. Tourists wandered. A homeless drunk dozed awkwardly at the base of the obelisk. A little girl fed pigeons. Langdon wondered if the reporter had scared the killer off. Doubtful, he decided, recalling the killer's promise. "I will make your cardinals media luminaries." As the echo of the 9th bell faded away, a peaceful silence descended across the square. Then the little girl began to scream. Langdon was the first to reach the screaming girl. The terrified youngster stood frozen, pointing at the base of the obelisk where a shabby, decrepit drunk sat slumped on the stairs. The man was a miserable sight, apparently one of Rome's homeless. His grey hair hung in greasy strands in front of his face, and his entire body was wrapped in some sort of dirty cloth. The girl kept screaming as she scampered off into the crowd. Langdon felt an upsurge of dread as he dashed toward the invalid. There was a dark, widening stain spreading across the man's rags, fresh, flowing blood. Then it was as if everything happened at once. The old man seemed to crumble in the middle, tottering forward. Langdon lunged, but he was too late. The man pitched forward, toppled off the stairs, and hit the pavement face down, motionless. Langdon dropped to his knees. Vittoria arrived beside him. The crowd was scattering. Vittoria put her fingers on the man's throat from behind. "There's a pulse," she declared. "Roll him." Langdon was already in motion. Grasping the man's shoulders, he rolled the body. As he did, the loose rags seemed to slough away like dead flesh. The man flopped limp onto his back. Dead center of his naked chest was a wide area of charred flesh. Vittoria gasped and pulled back. Langdon felt paralyzed, pinned somewhere between nausea and awe. The symbol had a terrifying simplicity to it. Air. Air, Vittoria choked. "It's him." Swiss guards appeared from out of nowhere, shouting orders, racing after an unseen assassin. Nearby, a tourist explained that only minutes ago, a dark-skinned man had been kind enough to help this poor, wheezing, homeless man across the square, even sitting a moment on the stairs with the invalid before disappearing back into the crowd. Vittoria ripped the rest of the rags off the man's abdomen. He had 2 deep puncture wounds, one on either side of the brand, just below his ribcage. She cocked the man's head back and began to administer mouth-to-mouth. Langdon was not prepared for what happened next. As Vittoria blew, the wounds on either side of the man's midsection hissed and sprayed blood into the air like blowholes on a whale. The salty liquid hit Langdon in the face. Vittoria stopped short, looking horrified. "His lungs," she stammered. "They're punctured." Langdon wiped his eyes as he looked down at the 2 perforations. The holes gurgled. The cardinal's lungs were destroyed. He was gone. Vittoria covered the body as the Swiss guards moved in. Langdon stood disoriented. As he did, he saw her. The woman who had been following them earlier was crouched nearby. Her BBC video camera was shouldered, aimed, and running. She and Langdon locked eyes, and he knew she'd gotten it all. Then, like a cat, she bolted. Ginetta Macri was on the run. She had the story of her life. Her video camera felt like an anchor as she lumbered across St. Peter's Square, pushing through the gathering crowd. Everyone seemed to be moving in the opposite direction than her, toward the commotion. Macri was trying to get as far away as possible. The man in the tweed jacket had seen her, and now she sensed others were after her, men she could not see, closing in from all sides. Macri was still aghast from the images she had just recorded. She wondered if the dead man was really who she feared he was. Glick's mysterious phone contact suddenly seemed a little less crazy. As she hurried in the direction of the BBC van, a young man with a decidedly militaristic air emerged from the crowd before her. Their eyes met, and they both stopped. Like lightning, he raised a walkie-talkie and spoke into it. Then he moved toward her. Macri wheeled and doubled back into the crowd, her heart pounding. As she stumbled through the mass of arms and legs, she removed the spent video cassette from her camera. Cellulose gold, she thought, tucking the tape under her belt flush to her backside and letting her coat tails cover it. For once, she was glad she carried some extra weight. Glick, where the hell are you? Another soldier appeared to her left, closing in. Macri knew she had little time. She banged into the crowd again. Yanking a blank cartridge from her case, she slapped it into the camera. Then she prayed. She was 30 yards from the BBC van when the 2 men materialized directly in front of her, arms folded. She was going nowhere. "Film," one snapped. "Now." Macri recoiled, wrapping her arms protectively around her camera. No chance. One of the men pulled aside his jacket, revealing a sidearm. "So shoot me," Macri said, amazed by the boldness of her voice. "Film," the first one repeated. "Where the devil is Glick?" Macri stamped her foot and yelled as loudly as possible. "I'm a professional videographer with the BBC. By Article 12 of the Free Press Act, this film is property of the British Broadcasting Corporation." The man did not flinch. The one with the gun took a step toward her. "I am a lieutenant with the Swiss Guard, and by the holy doctrine governing the property on which you are now standing, you are subject to search and seizure." A crowd had started to gather now around them. Macri yelled, "I will not under any circumstances give you the film in this camera without speaking to my editor in London. I suggest you—" The guards ended it. One yanked the camera out of her hands. The other forcibly grabbed her by the arm and twisted her in the direction of the Vatican. "Grazie," he said, leading her through a jostling crowd. Macri prayed they would not search her and find the tape. If she could somehow protect the film long enough to... Suddenly, the unthinkable happened. Someone in the crowd was groping under her coat. Macri felt the video yanked away from her. She wheeled, but swallowed her words. Behind her, a breathless Gunther Glick gave her a wink and dissolved back into the crowd. Robert Langdon staggered into the private bathroom adjoining the office of the Pope. He dabbed the blood from his face and lips. The blood was not his own. It was that of Cardinal Lamasse, who had just died horribly in a crowded square outside the Vatican. Virgin sacrifices on the altars of science. So far, the assassin had made good on his threat. Langdon felt powerless as he gazed into the mirror. His eyes were drawn, and stubble had begun to darken his cheeks. The room around him was immaculate and lavish, black marble with gold fixtures, cotton towels, and scented hand soaps. Langdon tried to rid his mind of the bloody brand he had just seen. Air. The image stuck. He had witnessed 3 ambigrams since waking up this morning, and he knew there were 2 more coming. Outside the door, it sounded as if Olivetti, the Camerlengo, and Captain Rocher were debating what to do next. Apparently, the antimatter search had turned up nothing so far. Either the guards had missed the canister, or the intruder had gotten deeper inside the Vatican than Commander Olivetti had been willing to entertain. Langdon dried his hands and face. Then he turned and looked for a urinal. No urinal, just a bowl. He lifted the lid. As he stood there, tension ebbing from his body, a giddy wave of exhaustion shuddered through his core. The emotions knotting his chest were so many, so incongruous. He was fatigued, running on no food or sleep, walking the path of illumination, traumatized by 2 brutal murders. Langdon felt a deepening horror over the possible outcome of this drama. Think, he told himself. His mind was blank. As he flushed, an unexpected realization hit him. This is the Pope's toilet, he thought. I just took a leak in the Pope's toilet. He had to chuckle. The Holy Throne. In London, a BBC technician ejected a videocassette from a satellite receiver unit and dashed across the control room floor. She burst into the office of the editor-in-chief, slammed the video into his VCR, and pressed play. As the tape rolled, she told him about the conversation she had just had with Gunther Glick in Vatican City. In addition, BBC Photo Archives had just given her a positive ID on the victim in St. Peter's Square. When the editor-in-chief emerged from his office, he was ringing a cowbell. Everything in the editorial stopped. "Live in 5, the man boomed. On-air talent to prep. Media coordinators, I want your contacts online. We've got a story we're selling, and we've got film." The market coordinators grabbed their Rolodexes. "Film specs," one of them yelled. 30-second trim, the chief replied. "Content, live homicide." The coordinators looked encouraged. "Usage and licensing price, $1 million US per." Heads shot up. "What? You heard me. I want top of the food chain. CNN, MSNBC, then the big 3. Offer a dial-in preview. Give them 5 minutes to piggyback before BBC runs it." "What the hell happened?" someone demanded. "The Prime Minister gets skinned alive?" The chief shook his head. "Better." At that exact instant, somewhere in Rome, the assassin enjoyed a fleeting moment of repose in a comfortable chair. He admired the legendary chamber around him. "I'm sitting in a church of illumination," he thought, the Illuminati lair. He could not believe it was still here after all of these centuries. Dutifully, he dialed the BBC reporter to whom he had spoken earlier. It was time. The world had yet to hear the most shocking news of all. Vittoria Vetra sipped a glass of water and nibbled absently at some tea scones just set out by one of the Swiss guards. She knew she should eat, but she had no appetite. The office of the Pope was bustling now, echoing with tense conversations. Captain Rocher, Commander Olivetti, and half a dozen guards assessed the damage and debated the next move. Robert Langdon stood nearby staring out at St. Peter's Square. He looked dejected. Vittoria walked over. "Ideas?" He shook his head. "Scone?" His mood seemed to brighten at the sight of food. "Hell yes, thanks." He ate voraciously. The conversation behind them went quiet suddenly when two Swiss guards escorted Camerlengo Francesca through the door. If the chamberlain had looked drained before, Vittoria thought, now he looked empty. What happened? The Camerlengo said to Olivetti. From the look on the Camerlengo's face, he appeared to have already been told the worst of it. Olivetti's official update sounded like a battlefield casualty report. He gave the facts with flat efficacy. Cardinal Ebner was found dead in the church of Santa Maria del Popolo just after 8 o'clock. He had been suffocated and branded with the epigrammatic word earth. Cardinal Lamasse was murdered in St. Peter's Square 10 minutes ago. He died of perforations to the chest. He was branded with the word air, also epigrammatic. The killer escaped in both instances. The Camerlengo crossed the room and sat heavily behind the Pope's desk. He bowed his head. Cardinals Guidera and Barger, however, are still alive. The Camerlengo's head shot up, his expression pained. This is our consolation? 2 cardinals have been murdered, Commander, and the other 2 will obviously not be alive much longer unless you find them. We will find them, Olivetti assured. I am encouraged. Encouraged? We've had nothing but failure. Untrue. We've lost 2 battles, Signore, but we're winning the war. The Illuminati had intended to turn this evening into a media circus. So far, we have thwarted their plan. Both cardinals' bodies have been recovered without incident. In addition, Olivetti continued, Captain Rocher tells me he is making excellent headway on the antimatter search. Captain Rocher stepped forward in his red beret. Vittoria thought he looked more human somehow than the other guards, stern but not so rigid. Rocher's voice was emotional and crystalline, like a violin. I'm hopeful we will find a canister for you within an hour, Signore. Captain, the Camerlengo said, excuse me if I seem less than hopeful, but I was under the impression that the search of Vatican City would take far more time than we have. A full search, yes. However, after assessing the situation, I am confident the antimatter canister is located in one of our white zones, those Vatican sectors accessible to public tours, the museums in St. Peter's Basilica, for example. We have already killed power in those zones and are conducting our scan. You intend to search only a small percentage of Vatican City? Yes, Signore. It is highly unlikely that an intruder gained access to the inner zones of Vatican City. The fact that the missing security camera was stolen from a public access area, a stairwell in one of the museums, clearly implies that the intruder had limited access. Therefore, he would only have been able to relocate the camera and antimatter in another public access area. It is these areas on which we are focusing our search. But the intruder kidnapped 4 cardinals. That certainly implies deeper infiltration than we thought. Not necessarily. We must remember that the cardinals spend much of today in the Vatican museums and St. Peter's Basilica, enjoying those areas without the crowds. It is probable that the missing cardinals were taken in one of these areas. But how were they removed from our walls? We are still assessing that. I see. The Camerlengo exhaled and stood up. He walked over to Olivetti. Commander, I would like to hear your contingency plan for evacuation. We are still formalizing that, Signore. In the meantime, I'm faithful Captain Rocher will find a canister. Rocher clicked his boots as if in appreciation of the vote of confidence. My men have already scanned 2/3 of the white zones. Confidence is high. The Camerlengo did not appear to share that confidence. At that moment, the guard with a scar beneath one eye came through the door carrying a clipboard and a map. He strode toward Langdon. Mr. Langdon, I have the information you requested on the West Ponente. Langdon swallowed his scone. Good, let's have a look. The others kept talking while Vittoria joined Robert and the guard as they spread out the map on the Pope's desk. The soldier pointed to St. Peter's Square. This is where we are. The central line of West Ponente's breadth points due east, directly away from Vatican City. The guard traced the line with his finger from St. Peter's Square across the Tiber River and up into the heart of Old Rome. As you can see, the line passed through almost all of Rome. There are about 20 Catholic churches that fall near this line. Langdon slumped. 20? Maybe more. Do any of the churches fall directly on the line? Some look closer than others, the guard said, but translating the exact bearing of the West Ponente onto a map leaves margin for error. Langdon looked out at St. Peter's Square a moment. Then he scowled, stroking his chin. How about fire? Any of them have Bernini artwork that has to do with fire? Silence. How about obelisks? He demanded. Are any of the churches located near obelisks? The guard began checking the map. Vittoria saw a glimmer of hope in Langdon's eyes and realized what he was thinking. He's right. The first two markers had been located on or near piazzas that contained obelisks. Maybe obelisks were a theme, soaring pyramids marking the Illuminati path. The more Vittoria thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. 4 towering beacons rising over Rome to mark the altars of science. It's a long shot, Langdon said, but I know that many of Rome's obelisks were erected or moved during Bernini's reign. He was no doubt involved in their placement. Or, Vittoria added, Bernini could have placed his markers near existing obelisks. Langdon nodded. True. Bad news, the guard said. No obelisks on the line. He traced his finger across the map. None even remotely close. Nothing. Langdon sighed. Vittoria's shoulders slumped. She thought it was a promising idea. Apparently, this was not going to be as easy as they'd hoped. She tried to stay positive. Robert, think. You must know of a Bernini statue relating to fire. Anything at all. Believe me, I've been thinking. Bernini was incredibly prolific. Hundreds of works. I was hoping West Ponente would point to a single church, something that would ring a bell. Vocal, she pressed. Fire. No Bernini titles jump out? Langdon shrugged. There's his famous sketches of fireworks, but they're not sculpture, and they're in Leipzig, Germany. Vittoria frowned. And you're sure the breadth is what indicates the direction? You saw the relief, Vittoria. The design was totally symmetrical. The only indication of bearing was the breadth. Vittoria knew he was right. Not to mention, he added, because the West Ponente signifies air, following the breadth seems symbolically appropriate. Vittoria nodded. So we follow the breadth, but where? Olivetti came over. What have you got? Too many churches, the soldier said. 24 or so. I suppose we could put 4 men on each church. Forget it, Olivetti said. We missed this guy twice when we knew exactly where he was going to be. A mass stakeout means leaving Vatican City unprotected and cancelling the search. We need a reference book, Vittoria said. An index of Bernini's work. If we can scan titles, maybe something would jump out. I don't know, Langdon said. If it's a work Bernini created specifically for the Illuminati, it may be very obscure. It probably won't be listed in a book. Vittoria refused to believe it. The other 2 sculptures were fairly well known. You'd heard of them both. Langdon shrugged. Yeah. If we scan titles for references to the word fire, maybe we'll find a statue that's listed as being in the right direction. Langdon seemed convinced it was worth a shot. He turned to Olivetti. I need a list of all Bernini's work. You guys probably don't have a coffee table Bernini book around here, do you? Coffee table book? Olivetti seemed unfamiliar with the term. Never mind. Any list. How about the Vatican Museum? They must have Bernini references. The guard with the scarf frowned. Power in the museum is out, and the records room is enormous, without the staff there to help. The Bernini work in question, Olivetti interrupted. Would it have been created while Bernini was employed here at the Vatican? Almost definitely, Langdon said. He was here almost his entire career, and certainly during the time period of the Galileo conflict. Olivetti nodded. Then there's another reference. Vittoria felt a flicker of optimism. Where? The commander did not reply. He took his guard aside and spoke in hushed tones. The guard seemed uncertain but nodded obediently. When Olivetti was finished talking, the guard turned to Langdon. This way, please, Mr. Langdon. It's 9:15. We'll have to hurry. Langdon and the guard headed for the door. Vittoria started after them. I'll help. Olivetti caught her by the arm. No, Miss Vetra. I need a word with you. His grasp was authoritative. Langdon and the guard left. Olivetti's face was wooden as he took Vittoria aside. But whatever it was, Olivetti had intended to say to her, he never got the chance. His walkie-talkie crackled loudly. Comandante? Everyone in the room turned. The voice on the transmitter was grim. I think you better turn on the television. When Langdon had left the Vatican's secret archives only 2 hours ago, he had never imagined he would see them again. Now, winded from having jogged the entire way with his Swiss Guard escort, Langdon found himself back at the archives once again. His escort, the guy with the scar, now led Langdon through the rows of translucent cubicles. The silence of the archives felt somehow more forbidding now, and Langdon was thankful when the guard broke it. Over here, I think, he said. escorting Langdon to the back of the chamber where a series of smaller vaults lined the wall. The guards scanned the titles on the vaults and motioned to one of them. Yes, here it is, right where the commander said it would be. Langdon read the title, Attivi Vaticani, Vatican Assets. He scanned the list of contents, real estate, currency, Vatican Bank, antiquities. The list went on. Paperwork of all Vatican assets, the guard said. Langdon looked at the cubicle. Jesus, even in the dark, he could tell it was packed. But Commander said that whatever Bernini created while under Vatican patronage would be listed here as an asset. Langdon nodded, realizing the commander's instincts just might pay off. In Bernini's day, everything an artist created while under the patronage of the Pope became, by law, property of the Vatican. It was more like feudalism than patronage, but top artists lived well and seldom complained, including works placed in churches outside Vatican City. The soldier gave him an odd look. Of course, all Catholic churches in Rome are property of the Vatican. Langdon looked at the list in his hand. It contained the names of the 20 or so churches that were located on a direct line with West Ponente's breadth. The third altar of science was one of them, and Langdon hoped he had time to figure out which it was. Under other circumstances, he would gladly have explored each church in person. Today, however, he had about 20 minutes to find what he was looking for, the one church containing a Bernini tribute to fire. Langdon walked to the vault's electronic revolving door. The guard did not follow. Langdon sensed an uncertain hesitation. He smiled. The air's fine, thin but breathable. My orders are to escort you here and then return immediately to the security center. You're leaving? Yes. The Swiss Guard are not allowed inside the archives. I'm breaching protocol by escorting you this far. The commander reminded me of that. Breaching protocol? Do you have any idea what is going on here tonight? Whose side is your damn commander on? All friendliness disappeared from the guard's face. The scar under his eye twitched. The guard stared, looking suddenly a lot like Olivetti himself. I apologize, Langdon said, regretting the comment. It's just, I could use some help. The guard did not blink. I'm trained to follow orders, not debate them. When you find what you are looking for, contact the commander immediately. Langdon was flustered. But where will he be? The guard removed his walkie-talkie and set it on a nearby table. Channel 1. Then he disappeared into the dark. The television in the office of the Pope was an oversized Hitachi hidden in a recessed cabinet opposite his desk. The doors to the cabinet were now open, and everyone gathered around. Vittoria moved in close. As the screen warmed up, a young female reporter came into view. She was a doe-eyed brunette. For MSNBC News, she announced, this is Kelly Horan-Jones, live from Vatican City. The image behind her was a night shot of St. Peter's Basilica with all its lights blazing. You're not live, Roche snapped. That's stock footage. The lights in the Basilica are out. Olivetti silenced him with a hiss. The reporter continued, sounding tense. Shocking developments in the Vatican elections this evening. We have reports that 2 members of the College of Cardinals have been brutally murdered in Rome. Olivetti swore under his breath. As the reporter continued, a guard appeared at the door, breathless. Commander, the central switchboard reports every line lit. They're requesting our official position on... Disconnected, Olivetti said, never taking his eyes from a TV. The guard looked uncertain. But, Commander... Go. The guard ran off. Vittoria sensed the Camerlengo had wanted to say something but had stopped himself. Instead, the man stared long and hard at Olivetti before turning back to the television. MSNBC was now running tape. The Swiss Guards carried the body of Cardinal Ebner down the stairs outside Santa Maria del Popolo and lifted him into an Alfa Romeo. The tape froze and zoomed in as the Cardinal's naked body became visible just before they deposited him in the trunk of the car. Who the hell shot this footage? Olivetti demanded. The MSNBC reporter kept talking. This is believed to be the body of Cardinal Ebner of Frankfurt, Germany. The men removing his body from the church are believed to be Vatican Swiss Guard. The reporter looked like she was making every effort to appear appropriately moved. They closed in on her face, and she became even more somber. At this time, MSNBC would like to issue our viewers a discretionary warning. The images we are about to show are exceptionally vivid and may not be suitable for all audience. Vittoria grunted at the station's feigned concern for viewer sensibility, recognizing the warning as exactly what it was, the ultimate media teaser line. Nobody ever changed channels after a promise like that. The reporter drove it home. Again, this footage may be shocking to some viewers. What footage? Olivetti demanded. You just showed... The shot that filled the screen was of a couple in St. Peter's Square, moving through the crowd. Vittoria instantly recognized the two people as Robert and herself. In the corner of the screen was a text overlay, courtesy of the BBC. A bell was tolling. "Oh no," Vittoria said aloud. "Oh no." The Camerlengo looked confused. He turned to Olivetti. "I thought you said you confiscated this tape." Suddenly, on television, a child was screaming. The image panned to find a little girl pointing at what appeared to be a bloody homeless man. Robert Langdon entered abruptly into the frame, trying to help the little girl. The shot tightened. Everyone in the Pope's office stared in horrified silence as the drama unfolded before them. The Cardinal's body fell face first onto the pavement. Vittoria appeared and called orders. There was blood, a brand, a ghastly failed attempt to administer CPR. This astonishing footage, the reporter was saying, was shot only minutes ago outside the Vatican. Our sources tell us this is the body of Cardinal Lamasse from France. How he came to be dressed this way and why he was not in conclave remain a mystery. So far, the Vatican has refused to comment. The tape began to roll again. "Refused comment?" Roche said. "Give us a damn minute." The reporter was still talking, her eyebrows furrowing with intensity. Although MSNBC has yet to confirm a motive for the attack, our sources tell us that responsibility for the murders has been claimed by a group calling themselves the Illuminati. Olivetti exploded. "What?" "Find out more about the Illuminati by visiting our website at..." "Non è possibile," Olivetti declared. He switched channels. This station had a Hispanic male reporter. A satanic cult known as the Illuminati, who some historians believe. Olivetti began pressing the remote wildly. Every channel was in the middle of a live update. Most were in English. Swiss guards removing a body from a church earlier this evening. The body is believed to be that of Cardinal. Lights in the Basilica and museums are extinguished, leaving speculation. We'll be speaking with conspiracy theorist Tyler Tingley about this shocking resurgence. Rumors of 2 more assassinations planned for later this evening. Questioning now whether papal hopeful Cardinal Baggio is among the missing. Vittoria turned away. Everything was happening so fast. Outside the window, in the settling dark, the raw magnetism of human tragedy seemed to be sucking people toward Vatican City. The crowd in the square thickened almost by the instant. Pedestrians streamed toward them while a new batch of media personnel unloaded fans and staked their claim in St. Peter's Square. Olivetti set down the remote control and turned to the Camerlengo. "Signore, I cannot imagine how this could happen. We took the tape that was in that camera." The Camerlengo looked momentarily too stunned to speak. Nobody said a word. The Swiss guards stood rigid at attention. "It appears," the Camerlengo said finally, sounding too devastated to be angry, "that we have not contained this crisis as well as I was led to believe." He looked out the window at the gathering masses. "I need to make an address." Olivetti shook his head. "No, Signore. That is exactly what the Illuminati want you to do. Confirm them. Empower them. We must remain silent." "And these people?" The Camerlengo pointed out the window. "There will be tens of thousands shortly, then hundreds of thousands. Continuing this charade only puts them in danger. I need to warn them. Then we need to evacuate our College of Cardinals." "There is still time. Let Captain Roche find the antimatter." The Camerlengo turned. "Are you attempting to give me an order?" "No, I'm giving you advice. If you are concerned about the people outside, we can announce a gas leak and clear the area, but admitting we are hostage is dangerous." "Commander, I will only say this once. I will not use this office as a pulpit to lie to the world. If I announce anything at all, it will be the truth." "The truth? That Vatican City is threatened to be destroyed by satanic terrorists. It only weakens our position." The Camerlengo glared. "How much weaker could our position be?" Roche shouted suddenly, grabbing the remote and increasing the volume on the television. Everyone turned. On air, the woman from MSNBC now looked genuinely unnerved. Superimposed beside her was a photo of the late Pope. "Breaking information. This just in from the BBC." She glanced off camera as if to confirm she was really supposed to make this announcement. Apparently getting confirmation, she turned and grimly faced the viewers. "The Illuminati have just claimed responsibility for..." She hesitated. "They have claimed responsibility for the death of the Pope 15 days ago." The Camerlengo's jaw fell. Rocher dropped the remote control. Vittoria could barely process the information. By Vatican law, the woman continued, no formal autopsy is ever performed on a pope, so the Illuminati claim of murder cannot be confirmed. Nonetheless, the Illuminati hold that the cause of the late pope's death was not a stroke, as the Vatican reported, but poisoning. The room went totally silent again. Olivetti erupted. Madness! A bold-faced lie! Rocher began flipping channels again. The bulletins seemed to spread like a plague from station to station. Everyone had the same story. Headlines competed for optimal sensationalism. Murder at the Vatican, Pope poisoned, Satan touches House of God. The Camerlengo looked away. God help us. As Rocher flipped, he passed the BBC station. Tipped me off about the killing at Santa Maria de Popolo. Wait, the Camerlengo said. Back. Rocher went back. On screen, a prim-looking man sat at a BBC News desk. Superimposed over his shoulder was a still snapshot of an odd-looking man with a red beard. Underneath his photo, it said, Gunther Glick, live in Vatican City. Reporter Glick was apparently reporting by phone, the connection scratchy. My videographer got the footage of the Cardinal being removed from the Kiji Chapel. Let me reiterate for our viewers, the anchorman in London was saying. BBC reporter Gunther Glick is the man who first broke this story. He has been in phone contact twice now with the alleged Illuminati assassin. Gunther, you say the assassin phoned only moments ago to pass along a message from the Illuminati. He did. And the message was that the Illuminati were somehow responsible for the Pope's death. The anchorman sounded incredulous. Correct. The caller told me that the Pope's death was not a stroke, as the Vatican had thought, but rather that the Pope had been poisoned by the Illuminati. Everyone in the Pope's office froze. Poisoned? The anchorman demanded. But how? They gave no specifics, Glick replied, except to say that they killed him with a drug known as... There was a rustling of papers on the line. Something known as heparin. The Camerlengo, Olivetti, and Rocher all exchanged confused looks. Heparin, Rocher demanded, looking unnerved. But isn't that... The Camerlengo blanched. The Pope's medication. Vittoria was stunned. The Pope was on heparin? He had thrombophlebitis, the Camerlengo said. He took an injection once a day. Rocher looked flabbergasted. But heparin isn't a poison. Why would the Illuminati claim... Heparin is lethal in the wrong dosages, Vittoria offered. It's a powerful anticoagulant. An overdose would cause massive internal bleeding and brain hemorrhages. Olivetti eyed her suspiciously. How would you know that? Marine biologists use it on sea mammals in captivity to prevent blood clotting from decreased activity. Animals have died from improper administration of the drug. She paused. A heparin overdose in a human would cause symptoms easily mistaken for a stroke, especially in the absence of a proper autopsy. The Camerlengo now looked deeply troubled. Signore, Olivetti said, this is obviously an Illuminati ploy for publicity. Someone overdosing the Pope would be impossible. Nobody had access. And even if we take the bait and try to refute their claim, how could we? Papal law prohibits autopsy. Even with an autopsy, we would learn nothing. We would find traces of heparin in his body from his daily injections. True, the Camerlengo's voice sharpened, and yet something else troubles me. No one on the outside knew His Holiness was taking his medication. There was a silence. If he overdosed with heparin, Vittoria said, his body would show signs. Olivetti spun toward her. Miss Vetra, in case you didn't hear me, papal autopsies are prohibited by Vatican law. We are not about to defile His Holiness's body by cutting him open just because an enemy makes a taunting claim. Vittoria felt shamed. I was not implying. She had not meant to seem disrespectful. I certainly was not suggesting you exhume the Pope. She hesitated, though. Something Robert told her in the Kiji passed like a ghost through her mind. He had mentioned that papal sarcophagi were above ground and never cemented shut, a throwback to the days of pharaohs when sealing and burying a casket was believed to trap the deceased soul inside. Gravity had become the mortar of choice, with coffin lids often weighing hundreds of pounds. Technically, she realized, it would be possible to... What sort of signs? The Camerlengo said suddenly. Vittoria felt her heart flutter with fear. Overdoses can cause bleeding of the oral mucosa. Oral what? The victim's gums would bleed. Post-mortem, the blood congeals and turns the inside of the mouth black. Vittoria had once seen a photo taken at an aquarium in London where a pair of killer whales had been mistakenly overdosed by their trainer. The whales floated lifeless in the tank, their mouths hanging open and their tongues black as soot. The Camerlengo made no reply. He turned and stared out the window. Rocher's voice had lost its optimism. "Signore, if this claim about poisoning is true—" "It's not true," Olivetti declared. "Access to the Pope by an outsider is utterly impossible." "If this claim is true," Rocher repeated, "and our Holy Father was poisoned, then that has profound implications for our antimatter search. The alleged assassination implies a much deeper infiltration of Vatican City than we had imagined. Searching the white zones may be inadequate. If we are compromised to such a deep extent, we may not find the canister in time." Olivetti leveled his captain with a cold stare. "Captain, I will tell you what is going to happen." "No," the Camerlengo said, turning suddenly. "I will tell you what is going to happen." He looked directly at Olivetti. "This has gone far enough. In 20 minutes, I will be making a decision whether or not to cancel conclave and evacuate Vatican City. My decision will be final. Is that clear?" Olivetti did not blink, nor did he respond. The Camerlengo spoke forcefully now, as though tapping a hidden reserve of power. "Captain Rocher, you will complete your search of the white zones and report directly to me when you are finished." Rocher nodded, throwing Olivetti an uneasy glance. The Camerlengo then singled out 2 guards. "I want the BBC reporter, Mr. Glick, in this office immediately. If the Illuminati have been communicating with him, he may be able to help us. Go." The 2 soldiers disappeared. Now the Camerlengo turned and addressed the remaining guards. "Gentlemen, I will not permit any more loss of life this evening. By 10 o'clock, you will locate the remaining 2 cardinals and capture the monster responsible for these murders. Do I make myself understood?" "But, Signore," Olivetti argued, "we have no idea where—" "Mr. Langdon is working on that. He seems capable. I have faith." With that, the Camerlengo strode for the door, a new determination in his step. On his way out, he pointed to 3 guards. "You 3, come with me. Now." The guards followed. In the doorway, the Camerlengo stopped. He turned to Vittoria. "Miss Vetra, you too. Please come with me." Vittoria hesitated. "Where are we going?" He headed out the door. "To see an old friend." At CERN, Secretary Sylvie Baudelot was hungry, wishing she could go home. To her dismay, Kohler had apparently survived his trip to the infirmary. He had phoned and demanded, not asked, demanded that Sylvie stay late this evening. No explanation. Over the years, Sylvie had programmed herself to ignore Kohler's bizarre mood swings and eccentricities, his silent treatment, his unnerving propensity to secretly film meetings with his wheelchair's porta-video. She secretly hoped one day he would shoot himself during his weekly visit to CERN's recreational pistol range, but apparently he was a pretty good shot. Now, sitting alone at her desk, Sylvie heard her stomach growling. Kohler had not yet returned, nor had he given her any additional work for the evening. To hell with sitting here bored and starving, she decided. She left Kohler a note and headed for the staff dining commons to grab a quick bite. She never made it. As she passed CERN's recreational Suite de Loisirs, a long hallway of lounges with televisions, she noticed the rooms were overflowing with employees who had apparently abandoned dinner to watch the news. Something big was going on. Sylvie entered the first suite. It was packed with bite heads, wild young computer programmers. When she saw the headlines on the TV, she gasped. Terror at the Vatican. Sylvie listened to the report, unable to believe her ears. Some ancient brotherhood killing cardinals. What did that prove? The hatred, the dominance, the ignorance? And yet, incredibly, the mood in this suite seemed anything but somber. 2 young techies ran by waving T-shirts that bore a picture of Bill Gates and a message, "And the geeks shall inherit the earth." "Illuminati," one shouted. "I told you these guys were real." "Incredible. I thought it was just a game." "They killed the Pope, man. The Pope." "Geez, I wonder how many points you get for that." They ran off laughing. Sylvie stood in stunned amazement. As a Catholic working among scientists, she occasionally endured the anti-religious whisperings, but the party these kids seemed to be having was all-out euphoria over the Church's loss. How could they be so callous? Why the hatred? For Sylvie, the Church had always been an innocuous entity, a place of fellowship and introspection. sometimes just a place to sing out loud without people staring at her. The church recorded the benchmarks of her life: funerals, weddings, baptisms, holidays, and it asked for nothing in return. Even the monetary dues were voluntary. Her children emerged from Sunday school every week uplifted, filled with ideas about helping others and being kinder. What could possibly be wrong with that? It never ceased to amaze her that so many of CERN's so-called brilliant minds failed to comprehend the importance of the church. Did they really believe quarks and mesons inspired the average human being, or that equations could replace someone's need for faith in the divine? Dazed, Sylvie moved down the hallway past the other lounges. All the TV rooms were packed. She began wondering now about the call Kohler had gotten from the Vatican earlier. Coincidence? Perhaps. The Vatican called CERN from time to time as a courtesy before issuing scathing statements condemning CERN's research. Most recently for CERN's breakthroughs in nanotechnology, a field the Church denounced because of its implications for genetic engineering. CERN never cared. Invariably, within minutes after a Vatican salvo, Kohler's phone would ring off the hook with tech investment companies wanting to license the new discovery. No such thing as bad press, Kohler would always say. Sylvie wondered if she should page Kohler wherever the hell he was and tell him to turn on the news. Did he care? Had he heard? Of course, he'd heard. He was probably videotaping the entire report with his freaky little camcorder, smiling for the first time in a year. As Sylvie continued down the hall, she finally found a lounge where the mood was subdued, almost melancholy. Here the scientists watching the report were some of CERN's oldest and most respected. They did not even look up as Sylvie slipped in and took a seat. On the other side of CERN, in Leonardo Vetra's frigid apartment, Maximilian Kohler had finished reading the leather-bound journal he'd taken from Vetra's bedside table. Now he was watching the television reports. After a few minutes, he replaced Vetra's journal, turned off the television, and left the apartment. Far away, in Vatican City, Cardinal Mortati carried another tray of ballots to the Sistine Chapel chimney. He burned them, and the smoke was black. 2 ballotings, no pope. Flashlights were no match for the voluminous blackness of St. Peter's Basilica. The void overhead pressed down like a starless night, and Vittoria felt the emptiness spread out around her like a desolate ocean. She stayed close as the Swiss guards and the Camerlengo pushed on. High above, a dove cooed and fluttered away. As if sensing her discomfort, the Camerlengo dropped back and laid a hand on her shoulder. A tangible strength transferred in the touch, as if the man were magically infusing her with the calm she needed to do what they were about to do. What are we about to do? She thought. This is madness. And yet Vittoria knew, for all its impiety and inevitable horror, the task at hand was inescapable. The grave decisions facing the Camerlengo required information. Information entombed in a sarcophagus in the Vatican grottos. She wondered what they would find. Did the Illuminati murder the Pope? Did their power really reach so far? Am I really about to perform the first papal autopsy? Vittoria found it ironic that she felt more apprehensive in this unlit church than she would swimming at night with barracuda. Nature was her refuge. She understood nature, but it was matters of men and spirit that left her mystified. Killer fish gathering in the dark conjured images of the press gathering outside. TV footage of branded bodies reminded her of her father's corpse, and the killer's harsh laugh. The killer was out there somewhere. Vittoria felt the anger drowning her fear. As they circled past a pillar thicker in girth than any redwood she could imagine, Vittoria saw an orange glow up ahead. The light seemed to emanate from beneath the floor in the center of the basilica. As they came closer, she realized what she was seeing. It was the famous sunken sanctuary beneath the main altar, the sumptuous underground chamber that held the Vatican's most sacred relics. As they drew even with the gate surrounding the hollow, Vittoria gazed down at the golden coffer surrounded by scores of glowing oil lamps. St. Peter's bones? She asked, knowing full well that they were. Everyone who came to St. Peter's knew what was in the golden casket. Actually, no, the Camerlengo said. A common misconception. That's not a reliquary. The box holds palliums, woven sashes that the Pope gives to newly elected cardinals. But I thought, as does everyone. The guidebooks label this as St. Peter's tomb, but his true grave is 2 stories beneath us, buried in the earth. The Vatican excavated it in the 40s. Nobody is allowed down there. Vittoria was shocked. As they moved away from the glowing recession into the darkness again, she thought of the stories she'd heard of pilgrims traveling thousands of miles to look at that golden box, thinking they were in the presence of St. Peter. Shouldn't the Vatican tell people? We all benefit from a sense of contact with divinity, even if it is only imagined. Vittoria, as a scientist, could not argue the logic. She had read countless studies of the placebo effect, aspirins curing cancer in people who believed they were using a miracle drug. What was faith, after all? Change, the Camerlengo said, is not something we do well within Vatican City. Admitting our past faults, modernization, are things we historically eschew. His Holiness was trying to change that. He paused, reaching to the modern world, searching for new paths to God. Vittoria nodded in the dark. Like science? To be honest, science seems irrelevant. Irrelevant? Vittoria could think of a lot of words to describe science, but in the modern world, irrelevant did not seem like one of them. Science can heal or science can kill. It depends on the soul of the man using the science. It is the soul that interests me. When did you hear your call? Before I was born. Vittoria looked at him. I'm sorry. That always seems like a strange question. What I mean is that I've always known I would serve God, from the moment I could first think. It wasn't until I was a young man, though, in the military, that I truly understood my purpose. Vittoria was surprised. You were in the military? 2 years. I refused to fire a weapon, so they made me fly instead. Medevac helicopters. In fact, I still fly from time to time. Vittoria tried to picture the young priest flying a helicopter. Oddly, she could see him perfectly behind the controls. Camerlengo Francesca possessed a grit that seemed to accentuate his conviction rather than cloud it. Did you ever fly the Pope? Heavens no. We left that precious cargo to the professionals. His Holiness let me take the helicopter to our retreat in Gandolfo sometimes. He paused, looking at her. Miss Vetra, thank you for your help here today. I'm very sorry about your father, truly. Thank you. I never knew my father. He died before I was born. I lost my mother when I was 10. Vittoria looked up. You were orphaned. She felt a sudden kinship. I survived an accident that took my mother. Who took care of you? God, the Camerlengo said. He quite literally sent me another father. A bishop from Palermo appeared at my hospital bed and took me in. At the time, I was not surprised. I had sensed God's watchful hand over me even as a boy. The bishop's appearance simply confirmed what I had already suspected, that God had somehow chosen me to serve him. You believe God chose you? I did, and I do. There was no trace of conceit in the Camerlengo's voice, only gratitude. I worked under the bishop's tutelage for many years. He eventually became a cardinal. Still, he never forgot me. He is the father I remember. A beam of a flashlight caught the Camerlengo's face, and Vittoria sensed a loneliness in his eyes. The group arrived beneath a towering pillar, and their lights converged on an opening in the floor. Vittoria looked down at the staircase descending into the void and suddenly wanted to turn back. The guards were already helping the Camerlengo onto the stairs. They helped her next. What became of him? She asked, descending, trying to keep her voice steady. The cardinal who took you in. He left the College of Cardinals for another position. Vittoria was surprised. And then, I'm sorry to say, he passed on. Le mie condoglianze, Vittoria said. Recently, the Camerlengo turned, shadows accentuating the pain on his face. Exactly 15 days ago. We are going to see him right now. The dark lights glowed hot inside the archival vault. This vault was much smaller than the previous one Langdon had been in. Less air, less time. He wished he'd asked Olivetti to turn on the recirculating fans. Langdon quickly located the section of assets containing the ledgers cataloguing Belliati. The section was impossible to miss. It occupied almost 8 full stacks. The Catholic Church owned millions of individual pieces worldwide. Langdon scanned the shelves searching for Gianlorenzo Bernini. He began his search about midway down the first stack, at about the spot he thought the B's would begin. After a moment of panic fearing the ledger was missing, he realized, to his greater dismay, that the ledgers were not arranged alphabetically. Why am I not surprised? It was not until Langdon circled back to the beginning of the collection and climbed the rolling ladder to the top shelf that he understood the fold's organization. Perched precariously on the upper stack, he found the fattest ledgers of all, those belonging to the masters of Renaissance: Michelangelo, Raphael, Da Vinci, Botticelli. Langdon now realized, appropriate to a vault called Vatican Assets, the ledgers were arranged by the overall monetary value of each artist's collection. Sandwiched between Raphael and Michelangelo, Langdon found the ledger marked Bernini. It was over 5 inches thick. Already short of breath and struggling with the cumbersome volume, Langdon descended the ladder. Then, like a kid with a comic book, he spread himself out on the floor and opened the cover. The book was cloth-bound and very solid. The ledger was handwritten in Italian. Each page catalogued a single work, including a short description, date, location, cost of materials, and sometimes a rough sketch of the piece. Langdon fanned through the pages. Over 800 in all. Bernini had been a busy man. As a young student of art, Langdon had wondered how single artists could create so much work in their lifetimes. Later he learned, much to his disappointment, that famous artists actually created very little of their own work. They ran studios where they trained young artists to carry out their designs. Sculptors like Bernini created miniatures in clay and hired others to enlarge them into marble. Langdon knew that if Bernini had been required to personally complete all of his commissions, he would still be working today. Index, he said aloud, trying to ward off the mental cobwebs. He flipped to the back of the book, intending to look under the letter F for titles containing the word vocal, vile, but the F's were not together. Langdon swore under his breath. What the hell do these people have against alphabetizing? The entries had apparently been logged chronologically, one by one, as Bernini created each new work. Everything was listed by date, no help at all. As Langdon stared at the list, another disheartening thought occurred to him. The title of the sculpture he was looking for might not even contain the word fire. The previous 2 works, Habakkuk and the Angel and West Ponente, had not contained specific references to earth or air. He spent a minute or 2 flipping randomly through the ledger in hopes that an illustration might jump out at him. Nothing did. He saw dozens of obscure works he had never heard of, but he also saw plenty he recognized: Daniel and the Lion, Apollo and Daphne, as well as a half-dozen fountains. When he saw the fountains, his thoughts skipped momentarily ahead. Water. He wondered if the 4th altar of science was a fountain. The fountain seemed a perfect tribute to water. Langdon hoped they could catch the killer before he had to consider water. Bernini had carved dozens of fountains in Rome, most of them in front of churches. Langdon turned back to the matter at hand. Fire. As he looked through the book, Vittoria's words encouraged him. You were familiar with the first 2 sculptures. You probably know this one too. As he turned to the index again, he scanned for titles he knew. Some were familiar, but none jumped out. Langdon now realized he would never complete his search before passing out, so he decided, against his better judgment, that he would have to take the book outside the vault. It's only a ledger, he told himself. It's not like I'm removing an original Galilean folio. Langdon recalled the folio in his breast pocket and reminded himself to return it before leaving. Hurrying now, he reached down to lift the volume. But as he did, he saw something that gave him pause. Although there were numerous notations throughout the index, the one that had just caught his eye seemed odd. The note indicated that the famous Bernini sculpture, the Ecstasy of St Teresa, shortly after its unveiling, had been moved from its original location inside the Vatican. This in itself was not what had caught Langdon's eye. He was already familiar with the sculpture's checkered past, though some thought it a masterpiece. Pope Urban VIII had rejected the Ecstasy of St Teresa as too sexually explicit for the Vatican. He had banished it to some obscure chapel across town. What had caught Langdon's eye was that the work had apparently been placed in one of the 5 churches on his list. What was more, the note indicated it had been moved there per suggerimento dell'artista. By suggestion of the artist, Langdon was confused. It made no sense that Bernini had suggested his masterpiece be hidden in some obscure location. All artists wanted their work displayed prominently, not as some remote. Langdon hesitated. Unless... He was fearful even to entertain the notion. Was it possible? Had Bernini intentionally created a work so explicit that it forced the Vatican to hide it in some out-of-the-way spot? A location perhaps that Bernini himself could suggest. Maybe a remote church on a direct line with West Ponente's breadth. As Langdon's excitement mounted, his fake familiarity with the statue intervened, insisting the work had nothing to do with fire. The sculpture, as anyone who had seen it could attest, was anything but scientific. Pornographic, maybe, but certainly not scientific. An English critic had once condemned the Ecstasy of St Teresa as the most unfit ornament ever to be placed in a Christian church. Langdon certainly understood the controversy. Though brilliantly rendered, the statue depicted St Teresa on her back in the throes of a toe-curling orgasm. Hardly Vatican fare. Langdon hurriedly flipped to the ledger's description of the work. When he saw the sketch, he felt an instantaneous and unexpected tingle of hope. In the sketch, St. Teresa did indeed appear to be enjoying herself, but there was another figure in the statue who Langdon had forgotten was there. An angel. The sordid legend suddenly came back. St. Teresa was a nun sainted after she claimed an angel had paid her a blissful visit in her sleep. Critics later decided her encounter had probably been more sexual than spiritual. Scrawled at the bottom of the ledger, Langdon saw a familiar excerpt. St. Teresa's own words left little to the imagination. His great golden spear, filled with fire, plunged into me several times, penetrated to my entrails, a sweetness so extreme that one could not possibly wish it to stop. Langdon smiled. If that's not a metaphor for some serious sex, I don't know what is. He was smiling also because of the ledger's description of the work. Although the paragraph was in Italian, the word voco appeared a half-dozen times. Angel's spear tipped with point of fire. Angel's head emanating rays of fire. Woman inflamed by passion's fire. Langdon was not entirely convinced until he glanced up at the sketch again. The angel's fiery spear was raised like a beacon, pointing the way. Let angels guide you on your lofty quest. Even the type of angel Bernini had selected seemed significant. It's a seraph, Langdon realized. Seraph literally means the fiery one. Robert Langdon was not a man who had ever looked for confirmation from above, but when he read the name of the church where the sculpture now resided, he decided he might become a believer after all. Santa Maria della Vittoria. Vittoria, he thought, grinning. Perfect. Staggering to his feet, Langdon felt a rush of dizziness. He glanced up the ladder, wondering if he should replace the book. The hell of it, he thought. Father Jackie can do it. He closed the book and left it neatly at the bottom of the shelf. As he made his way toward the glowing button on the vault's electronic exit, he was breathing in shallow gasps. Nonetheless, he felt rejuvenated by his good fortune. His good fortune, however, ran out before he reached the exit. Without warning, the vault let out a pained sigh. The lights dimmed, and the exit button went dead. Then, like an enormous expiring beast, the archival complex went totally black. Someone had just killed power.